We're still alive, and this is their defeat.
My name is Marcus, and 2 years ago my wife tried to have me and our son eliminated. Not with a tool or poison, but by leaving us to die in the Olympic National Forest. This is that story. Let me start at the beginning. My marriage to Sarah was falling apart. We'd been together for 12 years, married for 9, and somewhere along the way we stopped being partners and became strangers who shared a house. After she got laid off from her marketing job, things got worse fast. She blamed me for not noticing how much she was struggling. Said I was too buried in my startup, TechPoint Industries, to see she was drowning. Maybe she was right. I was working 80-hour weeks trying to get the company off the ground. But I was doing it for us, for our future, and at least that's what I told myself. So when Sarah suggested a camping trip with her family and friends, I didn't want to go. Something in my gut told me it was a bad idea. But then our 10-year-old son Jake heard us talking about it and got so excited. His face just lit up. He started asking if we'd see bears and if we could fish in the streams. What was I supposed to say to that? I agreed to go. The group was Sarah, her half-brother Connor, and her 2 college friends from back in the day, Lisa and Monica. I'd never really gotten along with any of them. Connor was the type of guy who peaked in college and never moved on. Still acted like every gathering was a frat party, even though he was pushing 40. Lisa was this uptight woman who looked down on everyone, and Monica was so focused on her phone and her image that she barely participated in real conversations. But Sarah insisted this trip would help us reconnect. She put her hand on my arm in that way she used to when we first started dating and said we all needed this. Looking back, I realized she was acting the whole time. The drive up to Olympic National Park took about 4 hours. Connor led the way in his SUV with the cracked taillight he never bothered fixing, and we followed behind in our car. Jake sat in the back asking a million questions about wildlife and camping. Sarah stared out the passenger window. The entire drive, like the trees, held answers she couldn't find with me anymore. We arrived late afternoon when the sun was at that perfect angle, where everything looks golden and beautiful. The campsite was a gravel clearing surrounded by massive pine trees with a shallow river running nearby. Connor was already cracking open beers when we pulled up. He tossed one to Sarah and gave me this weird wink that didn't feel friendly at all. Lisa was setting up her tent with military precision, every stake perfectly angled. Monica was scrolling through her phone, even though we all knew there was 0 cell service up there. Jake ran around exploring everything, full of energy and excitement. He helped Lisa with her tent, and she smiled at him, which seemed fake because she'd avoided our family for the past 3 Christmases. That first night we sat around the campfire Connor built. He claimed he'd chopped the wood himself, but I'd seen the plastic-wrapped logs in his truck. Sarah sat close to him, closer than she should have. They had all these inside jokes I wasn't part of. Monica played terrible pop music from a Bluetooth speaker. I just sat there drinking a beer that went warm in my hand, while Jake leaned against my side getting sleepy. Later that night, after Jake fell asleep in our tent, I stood outside looking at the stars. I watched the shapes moving around the fire. Connor was whispering something in Sarah's ear, and she was laughing, swatting his arm playfully. Lisa was watching them with this knowing look. Monica had wandered off supposedly to take a phone call that wouldn't go through anyway. The whole scene felt wrong, like I was watching a play I hadn't been cast in but was forced to sit through. I went to bed with a headache and a knot in my chest that wouldn't go away. The next morning, over instant coffee and packets of oatmeal, Sarah suggested we all split up for a bit. She used this condescending tone when she told me to take Jake on one of my little walks. There was a short trail by the stream that wouldn't take more than an hour, she said. I didn't argue. Jake was already excited, lacing up his hiking boots. I grabbed my small backpack, stuffed in a trail map and my water bottle, made sure I had my Swiss Army knife clipped to my belt, and we headed out. The trail was actually really nice. The trees blocked out most of the world, and for about 45 minutes, I forgot about all the tension and the dull ache in my head from barely sleeping. Jake quizzed me on animal tracks and asked if he could build a fort when we got back. I told him we'd see. He found interesting rocks and pointed out birds. It was just a good dad and son moment. When we got back to the clearing, everything was gone. Not packed up, gone, and the tents, both vehicles, all the camping gear, the coolers, everything. The fire pit had been covered with dirt. It looked like no one had ever been there at all. Jake froze beside me. His voice was small when he asked where everyone went. I couldn't answer at first. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I kept thinking maybe they were playing some elaborate prank, hiding in the trees, about to jump out laughing. But the air didn't hold any joy, just silence and the sharp smell of pine. Then I saw a piece of paper on the picnic table, held down by a fist-sized rock. I already knew who wrote it before I got close. Connor's handwriting, sloppy and smug. The note said, "This is for the best, trust me." That was it. No explanation, no apology, just those 6 words. My heart literally stopped for a second. Not skipped, stopped. Jake tugged at my sleeve, asking where his mom was. I crouched down so we were eye level and lied to his face. I told him maybe they went looking for us. He nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Kids know when something's wrong, even without evidence. I scanned the entire area. They hadn't left anything behind. No spare food, no water, no extra clothes. Even the first aid kit that had been near the tents was gone. They'd taken everything methodically and deliberately. I walked to where our tent had been and dropped to my knees, clawing at the dirt like I might find something they'd missed. Nothing. They hadn't just left. They'd erased us, like we never existed, like this was always meant to be a one-way trip. I told Jake we'd wait there for a while, in case they came back. He sat on the ground, pulling his knees to his chest. But I knew the truth. I knew the moment I read that note, they weren't coming back. Hours passed. The sun dropped lower and shadows started creeping through the trees. I walked the perimeter twice, hoping maybe they'd left a bag or a bottle of water. Anything. There was nothing. Jake got hungry. I gave him one of the granola bars from my pack. He tried to give me the last bite, but I told him I wasn't hungry. He didn't believe me, but he didn't argue. As night fell, the temperature dropped hard. I took the thin emergency blanket from my hiking pack and wrapped Jake in it. We huddled under the wooden shelter near the table. I held him close, rubbing his back while he drifted off to sleep. My eyes stayed open, staring into the darkness. What kind of people leave a child behind? It wasn't just Sarah, it was all of them. Connor, Lisa, Monica, people we'd laughed with, shared meals with, celebrated holidays with. How long had they planned this? Did they discuss it over wine, text about it in group chats I didn't know existed, and why? That question ate at me. Was it me? The tension in our marriage? The way I'd buried myself in work? Did they think I deserved this? Did they think Jake deserved this? I couldn't sleep. Every crack of a branch made my fist clench. Every whisper of wind made me reach for the knife in my pocket. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I couldn't afford it. At dawn, I walked to the river and splashed freezing water on my face. I stared at my reflection in the water. My eyes were sunken, my jaw tight. When I got back, Jake was stirring. He asked if they were back yet. I said not yet and helped him to his feet. We couldn't stay there, hoping. Hope was a trap. What we needed was a plan and distance. I gathered what little we had, the knife, the map, the empty water bottle, a small flashlight, and packed it all into my backpack. I tore up the note, ripped it into tiny pieces, and buried it under the dirt. Jake looked up at me worried, asking where we were going. I tightened the straps on the pack and told him we were going to find help. I told him we were going to be okay. I wasn't sure if I believed it yet, but I knew one thing. Whatever Sarah and the others thought they were doing, they'd underestimated one crucial thing. You don't abandon a man and his son and expect them to just disappear. I decided to follow the stream. Water always leads somewhere, right? A ranger station, a road, eventually civilization. I kept Jake within arm's reach the entire time. We walked for hours. The actual trail disappeared fast. We were just pushing through forest, climbing over fallen logs, ducking under low branches. I used the knife to cut through brambles and thick vines as we climbed up an incline that was slick with moss. I kept my voice light for Jake's sake. I told him this was like those survival shows he loved watching. He said, "Yeah, but the guy on TV has a camera crew." I actually laughed. I told him, "Well, you've got me. I'm your crew." By midday, the water bottle was empty. We stopped by a pool where the stream widened. I made Jake rest while I filtered water through a piece of cloth, let it settle, and prayed it was clean enough. He sipped it slowly. He suggested we should catch fish like on the survival shows. I told him one step at a time. We kept moving. I spotted some thimbleberries in a patch of sunlight. I made absolutely sure they weren't nightshade before we picked them. We ate until our hands were stained red. They tasted tart but sweet. Jake smiled for the first time since we'd found the empty campsite. That night we stopped at a break in the woods, where there were flat rocks and a patch of dry moss. I gathered bark, dead branches, and soft pine needles. I scraped the knife against a rock for what felt like forever until a spark finally caught. When the fire flickered to life, Jake clapped like it was magic. We shared the last granola bar. I gave him the bigger half. He handed me a bite anyway. Then he asked if I thought his mom got lost too. I stared at the fire too long before answering. I told him I thought Mom made a mistake, but right now we were going to be okay because we had each other. He nodded. He understood more than I wanted him to. He curled up beside me, wrapped in that emergency blanket. The stars above looked unreal, like someone had punched holes in black paper. I stayed awake long after his breathing became steady. Every sound felt like a threat. Every rustle could be a bear or something worse. But what really ate at me wasn't the external threats. It was the question of why. Why would Sarah do this? Why would Connor, Lisa, and Monica, people who'd celebrated birthdays with us and toasted to our anniversary, plot something so precise and heartless? This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. Every tent folded, every car started, every trace of us removed. This was orchestrated. And then there was the note. Trust me. Those words boiled under my skin. Connor, with his condescending smirk and lazy charm, had always resented that I'd built Tech Point from nothing in my garage and turned it into something successful. Maybe he thought he was doing me a favor by making me disappear. The next morning, Jake woke up shivering. I gave him the rest of the berries and a few sips of our filtered water. We moved slowly because his feet were getting sore, but he never complained. I made him a walking stick from a sturdy branch and showed him how to use it for balance. I told him he was a real outdoorsman now. He grinned, proud of himself. We stayed near the stream. I figured it had to lead somewhere eventually. Around noon, we found a patch of wild onions. I dug some out with the knife, rinsed them in the water, and we chewed them slowly. They were sharp and bitter. Jake spit his out, saying it tasted like feet. I laughed and told him that meant it was working. We made camp near a rock wall that night. The wind was louder there, the kind that whistles warnings. I built another fire, smaller this time to conserve energy. I noticed Jake wasn't eating much. I asked if he was tired, and he just nodded and then lay down early. His eyes closed fast, but I could feel heat coming off his forehead. When I pressed my palm against it, he was burning up. Too hot. I dug through the pack and pulled out some dandelion root I'd gathered earlier, crushed it up, poured water over it, and boiled it in a dented tin cup I'd found. The tea was bitter and dark. I lifted his head and helped him sip it. I told him he was going to feel better soon, I promised. He murmured something in his sleep, a single word. Mom. I turned away and blinked back the rage. I stayed up again all night, firelight dancing in front of me, my hands clenched around the knife. We were going to survive. Not because we were lucky, not because I had some master plan, but because I was going to will us through it. Because someone needed to answer for this. Because I needed to walk back into civilization with my son beside me, alive so they would know exactly who they'd failed to eliminate. By the third day, I was beginning to understand how truly indifferent nature is. It doesn't hate you or love you. It simply doesn't care if you live or die. And that quiet indifference pressed down on me as I carried Jake through a ravine, his weight lighter than it should have been, his breathing shallow against my neck. He'd stopped talking sometime late the night before. Even when he tried, his voice was barely a whisper. His skin was burning up. We'd been surviving on berries, wild onions, and stream water boiled over shallow fires. I'd even managed to catch a frog once and roasted it on a stick for protein, but it wasn't enough. Jake was small for his age, and this was taking a serious toll. I told myself it was just fatigue, just hunger. But when he started mumbling incoherently in his sleep, clearly feverish and delirious, I knew it was more serious. We reached a patch of flat ground, and I laid him down gently on a bed of ferns. His face was flushed with beads of sweat forming along his hairline, despite the cool mountain air. He shivered and curled up like he was trying to disappear into himself. I sat beside him with trembling hands and rummaged through the pack. Nothing helpful, no medicine, no antiseptic, no bandages. I only had what nature could offer, and that terrified me. I remembered an old survival guide I'd read years ago about dandelion root reducing fever. I chewed some of what I'd gathered, swallowing the bitterness, then crushed the rest into the tin cup with stream water and set it over a fire I coaxed from damp bark and dry grass. The smoke curled up slowly. Jake stirred and called out weakly, "Mom!" The word was like a knife in my chest. I wanted to scream her name into the trees, to demand answers about how she could do this, how she could leave her own child behind without a second thought. But I didn't. I couldn't afford that luxury. He needed me calm and strong. I helped him sip the tea when it cooled, holding the cup steady as his hands trembled. He coughed once and closed his eyes again. His breathing slowed, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he was slipping away. I grabbed his hand. It was too hot. I whispered that he was okay, that he was strong just like his mom used to say. I hated saying it, but he needed something familiar to hold on to. He didn't respond, just lay there, curled beneath the ferns. I sat beside him all night. I didn't doze. I barely blinked. I just watched him breathe. Every time his chest moved, a weight lifted slightly. Every time it paused, terror clenched my heart. I prayed. Not clean, memorized prayers from church, but raw, ugly, wordless begging. A bargain with whatever force might be listening. I hadn't spoken to God in years, but that night I made promises. I swore if Jake made it through this, I would become the man he deserved. And I swore I would make the people who did this pay. By morning, the fever hadn't broken, but it hadn't gotten worse either. That counted as a win. Jake opened his eyes around mid-morning. They were glassy, but he focused on me. "Water," he croaked. I gave him what I had. He drank slowly. Then he asked if we were still exploring. It almost destroyed me. I nodded and told him, yeah, we were just taking a rest. I cleaned him up as best I could, wiping his forehead with the edge of my shirt dampened with stream water. I tried to make a little shade tent with branches in my jacket. The day moved slowly. The fire kept dying. The wind picked up. I stayed close to Jake, gathering more berries, rationing our water carefully. By late afternoon, his fever finally began to drop. He was sweating less, his skin felt cooler. I didn't cheer, I just exhaled deeply. I leaned back against a tree, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to cry. Not loud or long, just enough to let some of the weight shift off my chest. Silent tears for a man who'd lost everything except the one thing that still made him human. I didn't sleep that night either, but I did close my eyes for a while, just listening to him breathe. And somewhere before dawn, I felt something change inside me. It wasn't rage. I'd already had that. It wasn't grief. That had come and gone in waves. No, this was colder and heavier, like steel settling into place. I would get us out. And when I did, I wasn't going to just call the police. I wasn't going to scream or plead for justice. I was going to systematically dismantle their lives piece by piece. They didn't just abandon me. They abandoned Jake, and that was unforgivable. I looked at my son curled beside the dying firelight, still wrapped in that silver emergency blanket. And I made a vow to the trees and the wind and whatever God had listened to me in the dark. They wanted me dead. But I was more alive now than I'd ever been. Day 6 began with the silence of decision. Jake was finally better, the fever having passed, though he was still weak. His cheeks were hollow and sunken from exhaustion. I gave him water and the last of some spruce tips we'd saved, and for the first time in days, he looked at me without that glaze of illness, clouding his eyes. "Where are we going today, Dad?" he asked, his voice still raspy but stronger. I told him somewhere better, and I meant it. The ridge we'd camped near sloped upward into a range of hills. I'd spent the last few days studying the landscape with that old trail map for my pack. It was frayed and almost useless, but I could make out basic features. Streams, elevation lines, symbols for cabins and ranger stations. The evening before, I'd seen smoke. Not wildfire smoke, but a thin controlled column rising over the ridge to the north. That meant either a fire tower or an old ranger lookout. If it was active, it meant rescue. If it wasn't, it was still shelter. Either way, it was hope. Jake tried to stand on his own, but winced. His right leg had been bothering him since day 2. He never complained, not once, but I could see the way he shifted his weight and the grimace he tried to hide. I took off my belt and looped it through the straps of both our packs, creating a makeshift sling around his shoulders and waist so I could carry some of his weight. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to get him moving. We climbed slowly. The incline was steep, littered with fallen branches and patches of loose rock. My boots slipped more than once, but I caught myself. I had to. I couldn't fall with him depending on me. Jake was silent for most of the climb, saving his breath. Every so often, he'd quietly ask if I was okay. I'd grunt back that I was and ask him the same. He'd say, yeah. We reached a small ledge by midday and paused. I gave him water and let him rest in the shade while I climbed a little higher to scan the horizon. And there it was. Smoke, a thin gray column rising steadily over the ridge. Controlled, purposeful. Not wild like a forest fire. A signal. Maybe a camp. Maybe a tower. I felt my knees weaken, but not from fear. We were close. I slid back down to Jake and smiled. See that smoke? He nodded slowly. That's where we're going. The climb was brutal. My legs screamed, my lungs burned, my hands were torn from grasping branches and scraping bark, from lifting Jake every time the terrain got too steep. I never let go. Not once. At one point, the makeshift sling came undone, and I slipped, landing hard on my side. My ribs protested sharply. I bit down on the inside of my cheek and forced myself up. Jake was crying quietly. I told him I was okay, brushing myself off and breathing through the pain. He pointed to my elbow, saying I was bleeding. I told him it was just a scratch, and we'd come too far to stop now. The final stretch was the worst, a narrow path over jagged rock with a ravine below. One wrong step, and we'd tumble down. I told Jake to hold on to my shoulders tight. I took each step slow, one foot carefully in front of the other, until we finally crested the hill. And then I saw it. A silver glint in the trees. Metal. An actual fire lookout tower with aluminum siding and a faded red roof. Smoke curled from a chimney pipe. There was life here, or at least a chance of it. I almost collapsed from relief. That's it, I said. That's where we're going. We descended the final slope slowly. The forest seemed quieter, like even nature was watching. I knocked on the door at the base with trembling hands and shouted. No answer. I circled around and found a hatch leading to a staircase, going up. I hoisted Jake onto my back and climbed. At the top, the door creaked open with a groan. Empty, but not abandoned. Inside was a cot, shelves with canned food, beans and soup and almonds, a first aid kit, and a flare tool hanging on the wall. I nearly dropped to my knees right there. This was salvation. I laid Jake on the cot. He looked up at me with exhausted eyes and whispered, "We made it." I gave him almonds and water. Then I carefully tended to his foot with iodine and gauze from the first aid kit. He winced, but didn't cry. That night I stood on the platform outside, pointed the flare tool toward the darkening sky, and fired. The flare hissed upward, blooming into a red flower of hope against the clouds. I watched it fade, and then I waited. 30 minutes later, I heard it. The distinctive sound of rotor blades slicing through the silence. A helicopter emerged from behind the ridge, dipping low over the treetops. A spotlight cut through the branches, scanning. I waved both arms and shouted until my throat went raw. They saw us. The helicopter hovered, then descended slowly, kicking up dust and pine needles. A medic jumped out, ran to the tower, and pulled Jake into their arms. I followed, limping and dizzy. I don't remember being lifted into the chopper. I just remember Jake reaching for me, his small hand finding mine, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room with an IV in my arm and a heart monitor beeping steadily. Jake was asleep in the bed beside me. Clean, warm, safe. I didn't know how many days had passed. A nurse came in and called for the doctor, but it wasn't a doctor who arrived first. It was a man in a dark suit holding a badge. FBI. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "do you know your wife filed for your passing last week?" I stared at him. The words didn't make sense. "She what?" He nodded slowly. "We need to talk." That was the moment I knew they hadn't just abandoned us. They'd tried to erase us completely. The hospital bed creaked as I tried to sit upright. My body felt foreign, stiff and bruised and hollowed out. But none of that mattered after what this agent had just told me. Sarah had filed for my passing. Not missing, not endangered, dead. And not just mine. Jake's too. The man's name was Agent Coleman. He had a thick folder under his arm that looked ominous. "We received the insurance claim last Wednesday," he said. "Your wife submitted it through an attorney. Claimed you went missing on a hike due to stress and mental instability. Said you took your son with you after a series of emotional outbursts. I wanted to laugh, but my throat was too dry. Agent Coleman opened the folder. There were letters attached to the claim, signed notes supposedly from you, a will, even a psychiatric report from a Reynolds. He dropped copies on the tray table. They claimed you had a mental break, that you wandered into the woods intending to die. I stared at the pages. I didn't need to read them to know they were fake. But there, in shaky cursive that almost looked like mine, were words I'd never written. They thought we wouldn't find you, Coleman said quietly. They thought you wouldn't survive. My eyes went to Jake, still sleeping peacefully in the chair beside me with a hospital blanket wrapped around him. The thought of him being listed as deceased in some government database made my blood run cold. How much? I added. Coleman raised an eyebrow. I clarified. The insurance. How much were we worth to her? $2.4 million, he said, and another $700,000 in a separate policy through TechPoint Industries tied to your ownership stake. I closed my eyes. And the others? I asked. Connor, Lisa, Monica, all named in the investigation, he said, flipping through pages. All corroborated the story. Your brother-in-law claimed he saw you leave the camp alone with Jake. Said you were distraught. Sarah backed it up with text messages that were conveniently saved. Lisa and Monica said they stayed behind because they were uncomfortable with your behavior. He paused. They even hired a notary to certify the new will. I let out a bitter laugh. Let me guess. Sarah was the sole heir. Coleman didn't smile. Correct. I leaned back against the pillows, my pulse thudding in my ears. We're compiling everything now, he continued. But the fact that you and your son are alive complicates their plan significantly. You were supposed to disappear. It's much harder to press an insurance claim when the body walks back into the world. I looked down at my hands. They were still scraped and dirt-stained. They left a child behind, I said quietly. That's not just fraud, Coleman said, nodding. It's attempted child endangerment, possibly more depending on the DA. And now that Jake's recovered enough to speak, we'll get his statement. But I need your help. We need your full testimony. Everything from the trip, every detail you remember. We'll pair it with GPS data from the helicopter rescue and the medical evaluations. If we build the timeline tight enough, we can dismantle their entire story. I nodded. Coleman met my eyes. Sarah hasn't been arrested yet. We didn't have enough until now. Something in me shifted. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was war. 3 days later, Jake and I were discharged. He clung to my side like a shadow as we stepped into the sunlight. I was 20 pounds lighter, limping and bruised everywhere. But I was upright. We were taken to a safe house while the investigation continued. Coleman visited daily, walking me through documents, transcripts, surveillance footage, timelines. We stitched together every lie they'd constructed. We had receipts from hardware store purchases made days after we were supposedly lost, showing Sarah and Connor buying replacement camping gear. We had ATM footage of Monica withdrawing cash to pay the notary. We had a paper trail of digital signatures on the insurance claim timestamp just 2 days after Jake and I had vanished, and we had Jake's voice on recording, calm but clear, telling a child psychologist that he and Daddy went on a short walk and came back to an empty campsite. When Coleman heard the recording, he said, "That's it, that's what we needed." I asked when they'd bring them in. He looked at his watch. "We already are." That afternoon, they executed the warrants. Connor was picked up from a gym. Lisa was cornered in her classroom, where she taught 4th grade. Monica was pulled off a flight to Las Vegas. And Sarah was at brunch, wearing my late mother's earrings, laughing with friends. Coleman showed me the footage later. She didn't flinch when they read the charges, just calmly placed her mimosa down and asked if she needed to finish paying the bill. But when she saw the cameras outside, her face changed. That was the moment it hit her. I was alive, and I was coming for everything. The trial was everything I'd expected and more. I stood outside the courtroom in a navy suit that hung loose on my frame, my reflection in the window looking unfamiliar. Jake was inside with my sister, reading quietly. He didn't need to hear this. He'd lived through enough. Inside, Sarah sat surrounded by the people who'd helped her. Connor with his arms crossed. Lisa in dark sunglasses. Monica chewing gum like this was just an inconvenience. And Sarah sitting front and center like this was just another meeting. None of them looked at me when I walked in. My lawyer, Patricia, dropped a thick folder in front of the judge with a sound that made the room flinch. Your Honor, she began, what you're about to review isn't simply evidence of a forged will or fraudulent insurance claim. It's evidence of a coordinated attempt to profit from the staged disappearance and presumed passing of my client and his 10-year-old son. The judge nodded. Proceed. First came surveillance photos. Sarah and Connor at a hardware store buying supplies 2 days after Jake and I had gone missing. Then receipts, gas station logs, credit card swipes, timestamps that didn't align with their statements. Then the audio. A voicemail Sarah had left on Lisa's phone the day before the camping trip. Make sure the gear is packed in Connor's car. Marcus is going to take the bait. Jake too. The courtroom went silent. The judge leaned forward. Play that again. Patricia did. This time it landed even harder. Then came the forged psychiatric letters supposedly from Dr. Reynolds, claiming I'd shown signs of breakdown and instability. The judge narrowed his eyes. We've subpoenaed Dr. Reynolds. He confirmed he's never met your client. His signature was copied from an unrelated document. Sarah shifted in her seat. Connor stopped tapping his foot. Patricia handed over the signed will, claiming I'd revised my estate 6 days before the trip, leaving everything to Sarah. And the notary? The judge asked. She's here, Your Honor. A woman in her 50s took the stand, voice shaking. I was paid under the table to stamp the document. I never witnessed a signature. I never met Marcus Harrison. I was told it was a rush job for a man leaving the country. She started crying. I didn't know there was a child involved. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand slowly. Every step reminded me of ribs that never quite healed. I told the court everything. The trip, the hike, the note, the fever, the fire tower, the flare. When I got to the part about Jake asking for his mother while delirious with fever, I had to stop. I looked at Sarah. He asked for you, I said softly, while he burned with fever, while he lay in the dirt thinking you were coming back, and you weren't. Patricia touched my shoulder. I turned back to the judge. We survived because we had to, but I want it on record. The people sitting over there didn't just try to steal my company, they tried to erase me, and they were willing to let a child die to do it. The silence afterward was thick enough to cut. During a break, Sarah finally looked at me. Her eyes were cold, not regretful, just calculating. The judge announced his ruling. The evidence establishes clear grounds for criminal trial. This court finds sufficient cause to move forward with formal charges of insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted child endangerment, and falsification of legal documents. You are remanded into custody until trial. Connor stood to protest but was stopped by bailiffs. Monica looked stunned. Lisa started crying. Sarah just blinked slowly. I walked out not as a sufferer, but as a man who'd pulled his son from betrayal and brought truth into light. The actual trial took weeks. Email threads between Lisa and Monica. Is it done yet? He won't last 10 days out there, not with a kid. Text from Connor to Sarah. We'll file Monday. The sooner the better. The notary testified again about the cash payment at a diner. Security footage showed Sarah alone at a bank 3 days before the trip, speaking to a financial advisor about liquidating a trust from my late grandfather. He won't need it, she'd said on camera. He's going through something. Connor's lawyer claimed he believed I was suicidal and had simply panicked. Then they showed a clip from Connor's podcast where he joked about camping. Don't leave your brother-in-law in the woods unless you're ready to cash out. The room froze. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts for all 4 of them. Sentencing. Sarah got 15 years, eligible for parole after 10. Connor got 12. Lisa and Monica each got 10 years. Outside afterward, reporters swarmed. Mr. Harrison, how do you feel? I looked down at Jake. 10 days in the woods taught me who my real family is, and it's not defined by blood. It's defined by who shows up, who stays, who fights. Jake and I moved to a small house near the coast. 2 bedrooms, a front porch, a yard. I painted his room sky blue and let him pick dinosaur bedding. We got a rescue dog he named Scout. The dog followed him everywhere. I rebuilt TechPoint from scratch. No investors, no board. Just a small team who believed in what we were creating. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about building something that was genuinely mine. Jake's doing well now. He smiles more, sleeps better, but sometimes I catch him holding the old compass I gave him during our ordeal. He carries it in his pocket like a talisman. One evening on the back porch, he asked, "Why did they do it, Dad?" I didn't sugarcoat it. They thought we were in their way, that their lives would be easier without us. He nodded, then said, "They thought you wouldn't fight back. They always talked over you. They thought you were weak." He was right. I'd made myself small in that marriage, convincing myself it was for peace, but it was really fear. The wilderness stripped that away and left only survival instinct. That's what saved us. Jake started drawing again. He showed me a picture of a man and boy on a hill with a fire behind them and stars above. "That's us," he said. "What's the fire mean?" I asked. He thought for a second. "It means we didn't go out." He's right, we didn't, and we never will. Those 10 days didn't just test us. They forged us into something stronger. Sarah and her accomplices tried to erase us, but they underestimated something fundamental. Survival isn't about having the right gear. It's about having something worth fighting for. I had Jake. That made all the difference. We beat 10 days in hell. Now every day after feels like a gift. I rebuilt my company. Jake's thriving. We have our house, our dog, our routines. We have peace. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm back in those woods, hearing branches crack, feeling that cold. But then I hear Jake breathing in the next room or Scout's collar jingling, and I remember we made it out. We survived. The people who tried to destroy us are behind bars while we're living the life they tried to steal. That's not revenge. That's justice. Sarah sent a letter from prison. She said it started as a joke that spiraled. But you don't file fake end certificates as a joke. You don't abandon a child in the wilderness as a joke. The truth is, some people are capable of cruelty when they think they can get away with it. But they didn't get away with it. We came back. We testified. We made sure everyone knew exactly what they'd done. Jake asked recently if I was angry. I told him I was at first, furious actually. But now I'm just grateful. Grateful we survived. Grateful he's safe. Grateful we get to build this new life together. "They made a mistake," he said, echoing my words from the woods. "Yeah," I agreed. "They thought we'd disappear. Instead, we came back stronger." He smiled and went back to his homework while Scout dozed at his feet and I made dinner. Normal. Peaceful. Ours. That's what survival looks like now. Not dramatic, just a father and son living their lives, moving forward,